Hello, hello, and welcome to Temple of False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I am glad that I'm Bruce. How about that?
I'm glad you're Bruce, too.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are glad you're Bruce.
Well, it's good to hear that.
Yeah.
I bring it up that way mostly because of the topic that we've chosen for this week. Decks that we wish we hadn't built, or decks that we didn't build because we knew better, but for the most part, it's decks we built and wish we hadn't, or, well, variations on that theme. So,
yeah.
The idea was that when we started talking about this, it was you hear a lot. I mean, we've done a lot of podcasts about some of our favorite decks, and that's well and good. And a lot of other podcasts, a lot of other plenty of articles have been written about decks that people enjoy playing. Mm-hmm. We thought that it would be interesting to talk about decks we wish we hadn't played, or decks that we wish we hadn't built at all. Discuss the reasons behind it. We're not going to go so much into card by card issues because it really doesn't come down to a card by card. I mean,
right.
If it was the card that was the issue, you take the card out and then enjoy the deck. This is because we thought we were getting something, and then over the course of gameplay realized that's not what we were getting.
Yeah. There's something about the idea conceptually versus in practice, because it's like it seems like it's going to be a fun thing, or
right.
I mean, but then it turns out to be supremely oppressive, or I mean, there's so many different things going on
right
in this realm that we just kind of wanted to pick it apart and talk about it conceptually.
Right.
Yeah. Like for me, for instance,
right.
Let's dive right into
yes.
it. I don't know if this is a deck that I like regret building, but it's definitely a deck that I like have a hard time playing because I wanted to build the deck for so long. It is the 3-color Omnath deck.
Okay.
If people don't know, 3-color Omnath,
yes.
Locus of the Royal, I believe.
It's a legendary creature elemental. When Omnath, Locus of the Royal, enters the battlefield, it deals damage to any target equal to the number of elementals you control. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target elemental you control. If you control 8 or more lands, draw a card, and it's a 3/3.
Yeah. So, it's for 4 mana, which is pretty nice, so that you get to your 4th turn or so. I mean, you're playing green, so right. It's probably like you can
yes.
play it.
To be fair, Locus, Omnath, Locus of the Royal, it's a green, a blue, and a red. So I didn't go through the colors when I listed it off.
So. It's a teamer deck, and I mean, the deck builds itself. You put a lot of elementals in it, and you put a lot of ways to put a lot of lands down. Like that's the deck builds itself.
Right.
The lucky thing, or the nice thing about Elemental Tribal is that elementals end up having a lot of ETBs that severely affect the board.
Okay.
Like even the cheap ones, which is great. That said, the reason that I like have such a hard time with this deck is because playing it, and it, like maybe I may be out of my depth here, but it does a lot on your turn. Your turns end up being like stacks of triggers, them resolving, figuring out what you do next, and like it involves a lot of like drawing, figuring out, sequencing, and going from there. So you're already slowing down your turn a lot. To your opponents, it seems like you're doing a lot. Like sometimes you are. But when you get to that last step in it, you come out the other side with like, I don't know, 10 cards in hand and not really much to show for it, then it's like, all right, you just wasted everyone's time. It's a lot of wheel spinning if you don't put the money into it. And then if you put the money into it to like make the deck a little bit more consistent, then it becomes oppressive, or at least like hard to deal with. For a lack of a better term, it is a little higher powered than our normal meta, with little effort put in. So like that deck, like I wanted to build it for so long. I finally built it. I like playing it for the most part.
Right.
But when, you know, the slightest thing turns into like a snowball of effects that don't affect the board too much, but because they are effects and you build up the stack to tear it down type of thing, you become the target pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, I look at this particular Omnath, and especially once you've got that, or once you play the 8th land, because at that point, every land you play, it's a +1/+1 counter and draw a card, and that's just from playing the land. Forget about whatever happens outside of that. And if you happen to have a turn where you're playing Omnath, then dropping a land that's either 8th or more, you've got a whole bunch of stuff that are going on, and the deck is full of a lot of little things. So Andy, like you're saying, it takes a long time where the net result is just not a lot,
right?
But it looks like a lot. So you end up getting this target when there are times when I think you should be the target.
Oh, absolutely.
But there are times when it's, you know, there's a lot of wheel spinning that goes on here.
Yeah. There's definitely been like a few times in the deck's lifespan. I mean, I think I've had it for, I don't know, 6-7 months at this point, if that. And it, there have been enough times where I'm now at the point where I'm like, well, if people are just going to target me now that I just like have, like, they know the commander, maybe I do spend a little bit of money to tune it up. I added things like Lotus Cobra,
which makes sense in the deck.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Mono green Omnath, and my favorite piece, Ashaya, who turns all of your creatures into land. So, like you were saying, you play a land, you get the +1/+1 counter and draw a card. Now, also on top of that, you play a creature, you get a +1/+1 counter and draw a card. It's like a makeshift Great Henge for much cheaper. But overall, the deck just, it's wheel spinny, and I don't know if I necessarily want to put in the effort and money into making it a deck that when I see people outside of the playgroup, maybe I pull it out.
See, it's interesting because I don't think it's just the wheel spin that leads to the problem, because I play my Vorel deck, and to me, Vorel is very much, at least my version of the deck, is very much a lot of spinning wheels. And yes, eventually, if you get enough other creatures and other things in play and you can do all sorts of things, then it starts to become a threat. But for the most part with Vorel, there's a lot of spinning wheels. You double counters on something that usually end up being irrelevant. And then I say go. And then everybody looks at what I've done and they're like, that creature just got bigger. That's it.
Because Vorel's just one target, right?
Yes. Oof. And when you look at, but when you're an opponent looking at what I've done, you're like, wow, he spent a lot of time, setting this up so he could tap this, to untap this, to tap this, to swing this, to double this, to undo it, to possibly double it again. It's like, well, congratulations. So instead of having 2 counters on your Vivid land, I now have 8 or something. It's something that's almost irrelevant. No, it's not the Vivid lands. You can't double the lands with Vorel, but it's it just it in the end it doesn't appear like you've done anything of relevance. And to be fair, most of the time with Vorel you haven't. My Vorel deck is significantly underpowered, but
you don't have any planeswalkers. You don't have any,
The difficulty with Omnath is you spin the wheels, and in the end, you've drawn a couple cards, usually, possibly done some damage. You've got, a creature or a handful of creatures that look sort of threatening. So it looks bad, but it's not so bad that you're in a position, or it's not, you haven't done so much that you're now in a position where you can be the archenemy.
Right.
The concerted effort of three other players who all think you're the bad guy is gonna take this deck down, and it's gonna take it down quick.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't. It's not that strong.
I think what's funny too is that, like, you know, I've been slowly getting into the idea of playing more counters because, like,
Right.
I don't generally, like, outside of my pirate deck, I really don't play any, and it ends up being a problem because then I am almost always left open. Like, I'm not going to buy Heroic Intervention for $20 or whatever it is. I've got Snakeskin Veil, which great, but I end up not having as much protection as I need. I can remove things, and I can do all these other things, but the protection of, you know, whatever is not there. But it's still it's a deck that I'm, like, hard pressed to power up because then it's almost too powerful for the play group. But if I power it down, then it doesn't do anything. So that's kind of why it's a deck that I don't. I wish that I, not necessarily didn't build, but learning experience.
Given the choice between that deck and another deck that you would play, do you usually choose the other deck, or are you sort of? I mean, for me, for the most part, with my decks, I roll a die, so I pick the deck at random because I want to try and play all of my decks. So I try and choose a random selection, mostly because, you know, if you're not choosing at random and you're choosing the one you want, invariably you choose the newest one or your favorite one and just run those. And I really want to mix it up. And I've got over 12 commander decks now. So if I don't roll the die and go that route, then there are some decks that I just will never play.
Yeah, I think with Omnath, so, like, I'm getting to the point where I have more decks than my bag can carry.
Right.
So I'm like, well, I need to figure out what I want to play before I even leave the house in the morning. But granted, I usually just leave my bag full of those decks anyway. Yeah. I mean, God forbid I have a fire. Just grab the bag. Yeah. But I think I can generally look in my bag, feel out what I want to do. And sometimes it is the Omnath thing. There are definitely more games that I've been like, ooh, like, I want to play Omnath, but I don't think now is the time. So there's definitely been more of those scenarios than I would like for a deck that I play more often. Right. I see a deck here, Bruce, that I know you're just itching to talk about.
Well, when we came up with this topic, this was the deck that immediately was front and center.
Yeah.
I mean, of all the decks I have, this is the one where when I roll the die, when this one comes up, I look at it and I think long and hard. It's like, okay, do I need to roll again? Because I'm not sure that I want to play this deck. So the deck is my Kalitas deck. It's the commander is Kalitas, Trader of Get.
So Kalitas, Trader of Get is 2 black for a 3/4 legendary creature, Vampire Warrior. Oh, is this your Vampire Tribal deck? It has lifelink. It says, if a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, instead exile that card and put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. It has an activated ability of 2 and a black and sacrifice another vampire or zombie. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on Kalitas, Trader of Get. Something I just realized reading this card is that token creatures do die.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, token creatures do die, which is fascinating. Because I've always hated this deck for Teysa purposes.
Well, I will say that the effect that you're looking for, it only works for the non-token creature.
Right.
So if a token creature dies, you don't exile it, and I don't get a zombie. So I can't. If one of my zombie tokens dies, I don't get another zombie token to replace it.
Right.
So I mean, they don't want to create that loop. That's the reason I'm pretty sure that's the reason it says non-token. But so for Kalidas, when I built it, my initial thought was, this could be cool, because what's going to happen, I'm going to find a way to kill some of my opponent's creatures. I'm going to make these 2/2 zombies. I'm going to sack those zombies and other zombies in the deck and some vampires. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to make Kalidas huge, because he's going to get all these +1/+1 counters.
Yeah.
And he has lifelink. So I'm going to gain life when he swings, and if he swings and gets blocked, I gain a ton of life. If he swings and does damage, well, then I'm doing commander damage, and this is going to be really cool. So my thought was, build a deck that makes a bunch of creatures and a bunch of ways to kill my opponent's creatures, that can make some zombie tokens, because the second ability, the 2 and a black, and sacrifice another vampire zombie, means it doesn't say non-token. So I can sack tokens. And I thought, this is going to be a lot of fun. Because, I'll get to make him big, put some evasion on him, maybe some protection. It'll go well. And my opponents are even going to enjoy this because, when it comes right down to it, it's Voltron.
Right.
There are very obvious ways to deal with with an opponent running a Voltron deck. And for the most part, if you're running Voltron, well, if you're attacking one player, because that's what you're going to do, because it's commander damage, you're not getting help from anybody else on this, then you focus on one person, the other 2 leave you alone. They let him get as big as you want him to get, and then when that other person's dead, if it looks like they're going to come your way, then they deal with your commander, and, you had a little bit of fun, but, then it just gets stuffed. The other part was the first paragraph. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile that card. Stop right there. So what happens is Kalidas says, anybody who's playing a deck that uses the graveyard to any extent is now shit out of luck, because Kalidas says that card's not going to the graveyard. You're going to exile it. And I get a 2/2 zombie. Well, the opponents don't really care about the 2/2 zombie part. They care that they're not going to be able to do their thing. I played it one game, and it ran fine. It was nothing special. But then by the time I played it the second time, I ran into somebody who was playing... they were playing... I can't remember what the commander was, but they were playing green-black. And Kalidas came out, and it just shut them down. And it was turn after turn. They had no way to access more draws, because they had nothing in the graveyard that would allow them to up, because that's how they were going to draw.
Right.
They had no way to do anything other than basically draw off the top of their deck and hope for some sort of creature removal. And it couldn't be non-black creature, because Kalidas is a black creature. So they were waiting and waiting and waiting. And in that particular game, they drew 6 cards and didn't draw a piece of removal.
Woof.
Well, it's 6 cards. That's not that unreasonable to not draw removal in 6 cards.
Right.
The expectation is, I'll draw more than 6 cards, because I have card draw engines in my deck, and I have other options to get 2 cards.
Right. And there are also 2 other players in the game.
Right.
But if you're the only one being shut out, then maybe they don't want to help you.
Right. And then in other games, I've had another game where 2 of my opponents were completely shut out. And, they can try and swing at me, but it wasn't doing them any good, because at best they put a creature out, and then if I can kill it, I get bigger, and they are hosed because the creature doesn't even go to the graveyard. So it got to the point where they were reluctant to even put a card out onto the battlefield for fear that I would just kill it, get even stronger. Okay, so where's the fun? And that's what happened with this deck. It just seemed like every time I put it out there, I was hosing at least one of my opponents. And the ones that I wasn't hosing, well, they still had some graveyard effects.
Right.
Even your mono white or mono blue has something every once in a while that gets stuff out of the graveyard, or has some effect, when something goes to the graveyard, or somehow. Graveyard recursion is something that has leached into virtually every color in Magic. Yes, black primarily, but all of them do it. And this card just says, no, I am going to take your entire strategy and shut it down. So now, on top of that, now they also have to play with the restriction that if they ever do get a removal card, they have to hold it and they can only use it on my commander. It doesn't matter what else is on the board, how bad it is. My card hoses their deck.
Right.
So they have to save it for that.
And then at that point you can, if there's any sort of protection on Kalidas, then everyone's boned.
Well, yeah. So it warped the game to the point where opponents were forced to focus on just that and nothing else. And honestly, the games just stopped being fun. And this isn't a product of what else is in the deck.
Right.
Because
this is
honestly,
just
it doesn't matter. That's the tricky part with Kalidas.
Yeah, sometimes it comes down to a simple one sentence, which is...
And in this case, it's,
Yeah.
exile the cards instead of having them go to the graveyard. So
because it's significantly different than just playing a Bajuka Bog on the person who's playing the graveyard deck. Because this is a constant thing. This isn't just like a one-time effect. This isn't, they're getting carried away, so I played it and targeted them. It's I played it because it's my commander.
Yeah.
It's interesting too because if any keen-eared listeners out there remember from 2 weeks ago, when Bruce was talking about his favorite cards of the year, he brought up Lisa, Forgotten Archangel, which she has a line that says if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. But it's I don't know, it's different. It's a little different.
When I look at Lisa, I think or even on Kalidas.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not your commander, well, that's one thing.
Right.
Because now you're just telling the opponent, look, get rid of it.
Yeah, get rid of it.
I have to do all the work to get it back out of the graveyard. Or if you exile it, it's just gone.
Yeah.
But if it's your commander, especially a commander that only costs 4, congratulations, you got rid of it. Turns out it took you long enough that I now have 6 mana. And the best play for me is to make sure you can't. And that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, if we all flip our commanders over and I see I'm playing against 2 people whose decks are going to get crushed when Kalidas hits the battlefield. Okay, well, I could just not play it. I just run a mono black deck. I mean, the deck is, it is designed with Kalidas in mind, but it can certainly run without him.
Yeah.
But that's never been the way I played.
Right.
I'm not the person who sits down and says, I've got a 2-card combo that automatically wins the game, but if I draw it, I won't play it. Okay, then just don't put it in the deck to begin with.
Right.
It's like, okay, so I'm just going to not play Kalidas, and if you guys kill me, then you kill me. When at any moment in time, I could just drop Kalidas and force you to deal with it and make your game that much harder. If I have the card in the deck, then I'm going to play it.
Right. It's a similar issue to Golos, where Golos, as soon as he comes onto the battlefield, pays for half of his tax for the next time you play him. So immediately, he's a 5-color commander and is generally replaceable because, this will be a topic for another episode, but 5-color decks are the same.
Well, this is the equivalent of saying, well, I have a demonic tutor in the deck, but I only ever tutor for lands.
Right. Why put it in there?
Well, because it's a 2-mana tutor.
Right. It's a 0-mana tutor.
Another land.
Yeah, Terramorphic Expanse.
Well, yeah, just put another land in if that's all you're going to do.
Right.
It's just the way the deck plays out, it just makes it means that so many games are just not going to be fun. And at some point, that's not fun for me either. It's, sure, if I can get Kalitas out early and I can watch you, watch you struggle against it for a turn or two, well, that's fine. But it's when it warps the game that I just can't. I don't see why. Why are we spending our time playing this game if it's just going to be unfun?
Yeah.
And it's happened often enough now where I don't really know if I want to play it. And this also isn't a case of the deck is too powerful for our metagame. This isn't a deck that is just, super strong. This is mono black. It's basically mono black good stuff. It doesn't really focus on Kalitas that much. It just, Kalitas warps it. And when an opponent, needs their graveyard, and I have easy access to a way to stop that endlessly. I mean, it's hard not to play it again and again and again. And just, it's like, keep dealing with it. Better to just not have that option.
Yeah.
Or at least have a way to limit the strength of that option a little.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think now's the perfect time to throw it over to our sponsor. We'll be right back, and when we come back from break, talk about more decks that we just we don't have time for.
Don't got time for that.
Sure. Is that a reference I'm missing?
Not really.
I like it. That's my brand. Thank you. All right, we'll be right back. This episode of Temple of Falsepod is brought to you by bowling down to 5, and then having your opponent look at you and say, "Just take 7." And now back to you. So we're back, and we're talking about decks that, however you want to say it, it's decks that we wish we never made.
Yeah.
It's a perfect Christmas time miracle type theme. Like, oh, I wish I was never born, and then
decks from Christmas past.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, what is it? Is Richie Rich? With Macaulay Culkin. I wish I was never born. There we go. All right. So this is the Richie Rich episode, and the next deck that I want to talk about is my Galazeth Prismari deck. We've talked about it on this show before. I enjoy the deck. It has the same problems my Omnath deck does, which is wheel spinning. And I don't necessarily think it's a matter of budget at this point. At least this one. I think it's a deck that I think just takes too much space in my head.
So, real quick.
Yeah.
Galazeth Prismari. Mm-hmm. It's 2 blue and a red for a 3/4 flying Elder Dragon.
He has flying?
Yes.
I'm just kidding.
When Galazeth Prismari enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. Artifacts you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell.
Right. So this deck, much like the Omnath deck, has 2 ways to go. You want to build up the artifacts, and you want to build up the instants and sorceries. All the while, you want to be able to live through that, so you have a few creatures in there to buffer your life total.
Yeah.
So that's the deck in its pure form. But what I did was that I got too focused on doubling spells. And if you've ever doubled spells before, your opponents look at you real fast as the target.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I have, I think, 1 extra turn spell in there, which also makes people roll their eyes. I don't play this game so that people roll their eyes at me. Sometimes it is nice to be the arch enemy, as it were, in a game. But if you're going into a game and not expecting that, then sometimes it's just frustrating.
Well, the thing is, having played against Galazeth Prismari, it takes the 1 turn. when you get that one turn that does extend, when you see the treasure tokens, when everybody watches as you're tapping the treasure tokens for mana instead of sacking them, and that leads to a spell, which leads to a spell, which leads to a spell, which leads to another spell, which leads to another spell,
which leads to storming off on Mind's Desire,
right?
And the Phoenix,
right?
Whatever I don't even remember what it's called.
Now, unlike Omnath, this deck does something when that happens.
Yeah.
So it tends to lead it. I mean, with a play group like ours, everybody has now seen this deck do this.
Right.
So everybody knows. It's like, okay,
coming for you.
We got to go after Andy.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of waiting.
And I think at this point in the deck's life, I expect that. So I've honed it a little so that it's at least a little more consistent. But I have yet to be able to figure out the balance between artifacts and spells, because that's the biggest issue with this deck, is that taking away artifacts gives you more room for spells.
Yeah.
But also vice versa. So like you have to find the balance so that you're not stuck without things to do. And I think that's like it takes up so much space in my mind of just like, how do I do this? Like I'm fine that when I pull the deck out that people are coming after me. I'm fine with that.
Right.
Because I know that they're enjoying that part.
Yeah.
I get that it's not like an issue of like, oh, like we hate playing against this. I know it's not that oppressive. But it's just I can't quite figure it out. I'm not like a spell slingery kind of deck builder, so like I thought it would be a fun exercise, and now I'm just like not necessarily hooked, but I'm staring at it. I'm like, I don't want to take this spell out because it's fun to do, but I need more ways to get that off the ground.
So is the issue with the deck how it has to be played, or is the issue with the deck finding the balance? So is this a matter of, is this going to be a deck you enjoy once you tinker with it long enough that you feel like you found that balance? Or
God, I hope so.
Right.
I think right now the issue is for me like understanding that each card needs a place in the deck rather than just like looking like fun.
Right.
In a deck like this.
Yeah.
Obviously there are decks that can get away with that, and it's like a lot of fun to be like, oh my god, I want to play this card, so I'm going to put it in this deck. With this deck, it is definitely the type that it will either do nothing all game, or it'll do nothing all game and I'll get super salty about it, or it gets off to a speedy start, people start attacking me, and then if I don't have it in that right balance, it will plateau, and I'm stuck with, I don't know, lands in hand and like maybe, I don't know, like some boots.
Sure.
So it's tough because I guess the reason I wish I didn't make it is just like for every other reason other than like lesson learning. Like I've learned my lesson. Like I don't want to play spell slingery decks except for this one. And I think it's the thing in my mind that I'm like, oh, I would love to double spells. That sounds like so much fun. But like that's where it ends. I can double my double spells. And I've got things like Mind's Desire. I've got things like I've got wonderful things that to copy. Electrodominance, one of my favorite cards.
Yeah.
But it's a one-time thing, and it just if I'm not winning the game, if I'm not like actively progressing the game for literally everyone at the table with my one big thing, then what's the point?
Right.
I feel like it's trying to look for a word other than masturbatory, and I'm failing to find. But it feels like a lot of smoke and mirrors, and it's just not what I like. So,
Well, so this will lead almost directly into my other deck. It's Krond with the Dawnclad.
Let me read it.
Sure.
Let me read it. You read the other one.
All right.
Krond the Dawnclad is green, 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 white, white, white. I believe we've talked about it once or twice. It's a good deck. It's a 6/6 flying vigilance legendary creature Archon. So is he, like, I know we've talked about this before. Is he the lion or is he the man?
Pretty sure he's the dude.
Okay.
But that's been a topic of discussion for years.
It's interesting because Archon has a specific definition.
Yeah.
And I just don't want to look it up. It ruins the fun.
Yeah.
Whenever Krond the Dawnclad attacks, if it's enchanted, exile target permanent. Exile target permanent.
Yes. So, Krond and I have had a love affair for 10 years. Let's say 10 years. I built Krond. I wrote about Krond. Anybody who's interested can certainly look it up. I've written about Krond at least 4 or 5 times. When it comes right down to it, I love Krond. I love the idea of the card. I love a flying 6/6 vigilance creature. I love the Selesnya colors, and Krond was supposed to be my deck building challenge. The idea that a 6/6 Vig with that ability, it's like, how can I best take advantage of this? Well, it was, I tried some auras. It wasn't that successful. Tried other auras, improved the success rate, but not by a ton. And eventually just, had to fiddle with the land counts and the way the mana production for the deck, because hey, 3 green and 3 white is not as easy as you might think if you've never tried to do it. This deck just kept going and going, and most of the time when I play it, I pull it out. Everyone's excited because it's different. It's something no one else plays this card, so it's different. And people who know me know that this is one of the cards that was a commander that was pretty consistent for me. This deck lost all the time. When it won most of the time because I was doing something else with the cards in the deck, and Krond had nothing to do with it.
It won because everyone knew what the deck could do and looked other ways.
Yeah.
They were like, Bruce isn't a threat yet.
The deck it was extremely slow to start, and then it was all about Krond. So the first enchantment that you played, or the first aura that you played, had to be some kind of protection. Had to be. Or else he was just going to be gone, because nobody wants to see a permanent exiled, because it doesn't even have to be the person you're attacking. So I can find somebody who is vulnerable where Krond will survive, swing at them, and then go after somebody else's thing. And they don't know it until the attack.
Right.
So everybody has a reason to go after Krond. And even if I say, I'm going after just that one, everybody else doesn't have to worry. Well, they do have to worry, because that's part of the problem. Basically, it was going through, and every time I tried to make the deck do what I wanted it to do, the deck would lose, because it was this super focused point of attack, and most of the time it just didn't work. And I can make the deck better. It's not that hard. You got all these auras, well, go with the enchantment themes. You are in Selesnya, but then it's not about Krond anymore. I should pick a different commander. Or you can choose all sorts of ways to try and make the deck better, but all of them just involve not using Krond. And I was just like, well, then why is he there? So I kept trying. I would alter it and alter it and alter it, and this deck has gone on for 10 years. And in that time, it has seen major overhauls, 4 different times, with minor changes to cards, all the time. It just never quite pulled it off. So it was just... it wasn't that I never wanted to build it. It was just I needed to recognize that at some point I need to let this go, and it should have happened far earlier than it ever did.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of the thing with these decks, is that it's not that I wish I didn't build it, but it's just the baggage that came along with it was so unexpected. I mean, I think with you and me both, like our second decks were very like, how do we like, not even like how long do we tinker with this for, but like how do we what is this working toward, and like at what point is working toward it just, hey, choose a different commander,
right?
And I don't know, it's interesting. I'm working on a Gruul build right now, and I'm considering adding white to it to make a Naya deck, because I don't know, white's cool. White's got a bunch of
stuff you want to try.
Yeah, but I'm like, what is that step? And once I do it, will I regret it? And
right. I
think sometimes you just got to do it and then figure it out from there. But next week is our 50th episode.
Boom.
It's also our season finale. Is what happens when we have 10 episode seasons.
You know what that means? It means Bruce needs to work on a deck.
Oh my god, I do too. Luckily, I think we'll be recording this in 2 weeks, because I have not started. It's so interesting because now that we've talked about Krond, I'm like, I want to build a Krond deck, and I almost went, we should have that be our theme. But our theme for next week, because it'll be it'll mark 1 month before the release of Neon Dynasty. Our theme is Kamigawa. We will we'll not restrict ourselves any further than that. But that's our theme. We'll figure out what that means when we see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. We're Temple of Falspot, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Go build a deck and then live to regret it. We will see you next week. Thank you again for listening, and may your fifth land be the temple.
Bye!
Wait. Before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter @falsepodmtg. Bruce is @manaburned, and I'm @AndyWeekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your fifth land be the temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!